In Washington Properties versus Chin, we'll see how courts determine whether a disputed contract provision is a condition precedent. Chin and Washington Properties entered into a contract that granted Washington Properties an 8-year option to purchase property from Chin in exchange for a series of payments. The contract included a provision that required Chin to obtain its lender's consent to be bound by the contract. However, the provision didn't have any conditional language or consequences if Chin failed to comply with the provision. The purpose of the provision was to ensure that Washington Properties would retain the option to purchase the property even if Chin's lender foreclosed on the property. The property wasn't under the threat of foreclosure when the contract was created. Other provisions in the contract contained explicit conditions. For example, one provision held that if Washington Properties exercised its option to purchase the property, then Chin must provide clear title to the property, or Washington Properties could be released from the contract. After Chin and Washington Properties signed the contract, Washington Properties made an initial $20,000 payment to Chin. However, after Chin couldn't secure the lender's consent to be bound by the contract, Washington Properties stopped making payments. Chin sued Washington Properties for breach of contract. The trial court granted summary judgment in favor of Chin. Washington Properties appealed. Washington Properties argued that there was a factual dispute over whether the lender consent provision was a condition precedent. Because Chin failed to obtain the lender's consent, Washington Properties claimed that its performance was excused under the contract because the performance was conditional on Chin obtaining its lender's consent to be bound by the contract. Even if the provision was found to not be an express condition, Washington Properties argued that the court should then impose a constructive condition.